90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. My special guest today is Fran Hawthorne, and she's the author of a new novel about a lawyer and about the law and legal issues. She's also a prize-winning nonfiction author and a journalist and a novelist. Fran, welcome back to Law You Should Know.
Hey, Ken, thank you for inviting me.
Congratulations on your new book that was published in November of 2022. And since it's about a lawyer and deals with certain legal issues, I think we can learn a lot from you and your latest book. So tell us, why did you write a book featuring a lawyer as a main character?
Yeah, well, because it fit in so perfectly with the plot I had in mind. What sets off the novel, which I'm not giving away much, it's in the prologue, is that the main character is arrested for helping her friend kidnap the friend's daughter, but they don't realize it's kidnap because they are not lawyers. But then 7 years later, her fiance, who is an assistant U.S. attorney, finds out about this. And it's so much more striking and dramatic that he is a lawyer and a prosecutor. You know, it'd be less of perhaps of a shock or a strain on the relationship if he were as kind of innocent of the law as she is.
And so in the novel, is the lawyer doing something criminal or merely unethical, or just doesn't have a clue?
Well, so there's the two fiancés. Miranda, the one who's arrested for kidnap, she is not a lawyer. So she does not realize that what she sees as helping her friend actually violates a number of laws. The friend is in the middle of a divorce, so there's custody issues, there's Hague, international kidnapping issues because they're flying to Israel. Her fiancé is a lawyer, and he sees himself as a corruption fighter. He's a prosecutor. He's focusing on business corruption. And so he feels that he has these high ethical standards. And here's his fiancée, whom he's trusted, who has broken the law some years ago and never told him she was arrested. So that's the first kind of place where the law comes in, her breaking of the law and how that might conflict with his security clearance for his job, with his own ethical and legal ethical standards. And then there are other
and of course
issues.
Might complicate their relationship going forward.
Exactly. Will the marriage, will they break off the engagement?
And beyond, does his opinion, his relationship with her change in any ways? What about his reason for becoming a lawyer, and how does that dovetail with what you just mentioned about him? Yeah,
as I said, he sees himself as this, fighter for truth, justice, and the American way, as it were. And I do mean to be slightly ironic about that. I don't say at all that that's the reason most people become lawyers. I mean, I'd like to think that we all have some idealism, but, I'm trying not to be naive myself. But he sees this as a way, and the law can be, indeed, a tool for digging out not just illegal behavior, but, he had corruption, unethical behavior, whether in business or in government or, other ways.
And even bad behavior, even if it doesn't quite reach the standards of corruption or criminal behavior.
Exactly. That's why I said unethical. Exactly. So he chooses to go into this partly for it's a way of rebelling against his father. His father is a professor who strongly defends corporations. And I mean, not as a lawyer, but as a professor in his lectures and his books. And so his son, Russ, the lawyer, fiance, protagonist, is furious at his father. And he says he's got this kind of, idea of he's going to take the other route and he's going to investigate the kind of, quote, evil companies his father might rhetorically defend. As I said, his father is not a lawyer. And this ties in with his fiance form of idealism. She comes from a family, a long line of social activists on the leftist side. So, they share what they think are these, ideals, these ways of using the law and other tools to, change the world.
And so Russ may find that Miranda's on the wrong side of the law, and he, by what he does or does not do, may put his ideals in jeopardy. Yes,
and not only that, his job in jeopardy.
And his life, yeah.
Yeah, because, he has been temporarily hired as an assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. And, he has to go through a security vetting. And that's how the FBI, in the process of this security vetting, which folks, assistant U.S. attorneys and have to go through and other, government prosecutors. Anyway, the FBI uncovers his fiancée Miranda's arrest, which she thought would stay hidden because it was reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor. It was plea bargained. But what she didn't realize is that when the government's digging in, they're going to talk, they find arrest record, they're going to talk to the local prosecutors, they're going to say, what are the details of this arrest? And they're going to find out the original charges. And she did not realize this.
And of course, if you would not disclose things properly, if you made improper or erroneous representations on your security clearance application, it could put your standing in jeopardy as well.
Exactly. When Russ's boss finds out that Russ unknowingly lied on his security clearance, say nobody in his family, nobody in his fiance's family had any arrest record. He did not know that this wasn't true. But as far as the law office, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI are concerned, he lied.
And sometimes lying to the FBI or other government officials is a crime itself.
So, then it's legally, is it a lie? He didn't know he was. You get into the issue of intent. And he's going to try and fight to keep his job, but it's not clear that he will be able to.
And do you think many people out there, have a potential to be in that situation or may have found themselves in that situation?
I think that many people feel like there are things in their past that no one will ever find out, that they were so young. Maybe it was something that was sealed. You go back years, depending on the venue and the crime, you can go back some years later, right, and have your arrest record sealed. Of course, if you were a juvenile, you can. But even if not, in many states, you can go back. So people feel like they deserve a second chance. Why should they have to reveal this embarrassing, if not illegal, incident from their past? I think that's fairly common. Certainly, it's common that there are things we don't tell even the people closest to us. May not be crimes.
And laws are evolving on whether you can ask or you have to tell about arrests, and depending on how those things were resolved.
Yeah, especially in job applications.
Yeah, exactly. And any other thoughts of whether this is, the setting you've put out there represents an over-idealized view of why people become lawyers or why people choose law school?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I did on purpose make him somewhat naively idealistic, maybe makes him a sympathetic character. People choose to become lawyers for all kinds of reasons, and certainly your audience knows this better than I do. And I would think that in some cases, they are idealistic reasons, the same reason that some of us become journalists. We want to, uncover corruption or, help people, you like if you become, let's say, a consumer advocate kind of journalist, you're helping people learn their rights. Can be all kinds of reasons. So that's certainly, I think, one reason people do it. There are other reasons people become lawyers, and you could name more than I could. There are people who are just, fascinated by the intellectual challenge. People who love to argue and debate, I suppose. People who love the research aspect of it, right? I mean, you could tell me probably many more motivations.
And I think also that, given some of the dynamics in the book, sometimes people also like the idea of a second chance, of allowing people to move on and to leave certain things in the past that may have been not as good.
Yeah, that's very important. And we see this today with the drive toward, for example, giving ex-felons the right to vote again, restoring their right to vote. That's part of the whole second chance. And you've got laws such as in Florida a few years ago, a referendum in Florida that said ex-felons can indeed.
And as you've said, so it shouldn't be a relevant factor in barring someone from employment or obtaining a license or things along that line.
Yeah, that's definitely a trend in recent years. Absolutely.
I'd like to remind our listeners that you're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC. We're talking about the new book, I Meant to Kill You, by our guest.
No.
I'm sorry, I meant to tell you. Your next book will be I Meant to Kill You. The new book is I Meant to Tell You by our guest, author Fran Hawthorne. She's a journalist and a prize-winning nonfiction author, and she is also a novelist. And she's telling us about her book, which is coming out in November of 2022. So do you think, especially as we emerge from COVID, that there's an increased audience out there for novels about lawyers and legal issues?
It's an interesting connection with COVID. I hadn't thought about that connection. I have to think a minute. I will say this much, I'm not saying anything new. I think it's been discussed for years that over the past few decades, Americans have become increasingly litigious, more and more lawsuits, more and more sense of suing over rights. And I think that has led to an increase in books, including novels, fiction written about lawyers and the law, increased desire on the part of the public to read books about lawyers. Mine's a bit different. It's not a courtroom drama. I'm not Scott Turow. I'm not John Grisham, though I wouldn't mind. But it's looking at the law as through the eyes of a novel in a different way, sort of more how it affects ordinary people's lives. And I'm hoping that there's an interest in looking at law in a novel from some different viewpoints. And
you have a lot of interesting non-legal characters who will be affected by what this lawyer did or did not do.
Yes, exactly. Because if we have a community of people in our lives, and some are lawyers and some aren't, and it may well be that what the lawyers do affect our lives, even if we're not lawyers. As in this case, whether the non-lawyer who was arrested for kidnapping, and her lawyer fiance is understandably upset. Well, what effect this will have on her life? She's not a lawyer. On her family's lives, his family's lives, on and on. And COVID, but you brought up the issue of COVID. Well, it's interesting. Thankfully for me, more people were reading books and buying books during COVID because, we're stuck at home. I sure hope that habit continues. And if people are reading more books, presumably they may be expanding the kinds of books they read. So maybe if they hadn't read books about lawyers before, maybe they would now. You could tell me something. Have we seen more legal action because of COVID? I suppose there would be.
Well, I think there will be legal actions going forward and building up because they were slowed down by COVID. And people also have a greater appreciation for legal issues because it may affect them or their families. They may realize there are different viewpoints on legal issues, and they may have different legal battles or legal hurdles to overcome following COVID.
Yeah, whether there should be a mask mandate, whether it ended too soon, whether it lasted too long, whether it prevented their employment. or their kids' education, or they got sick because there was
And the idea of masks or no mask, and whether they can, other people can impose their will on them for vaccines or not, and or individual rights. There are many different ways to go on it, but the value of property, businesses, people who've suffered losses because of COVID and because of shutdowns, and and renegotiating leases and contracts and everything else.
Landlords who lost money, plus all the potential lawsuits against drug companies. If there are, I think the federal government had, said that the drug manufacturers who create vaccines would be immune from lawsuits.
Generally, then there is some immunity. I don't think that's a big issue, but the mandates, whether people have to be vaccinated, whether they can feel safe in the workplace, whether they have to return to their workplace or have a right to work from home, or there will be legal issues going forward. And even in schools, and vaccinating children or teachers or others, there's going to be a lot of issues coming out of this, and people will keep these things in mind going forward. In leases and contracts and agreements and medical issues. Anyway, you have had a long writing career, and I'll ask you to tell us about some of your other books in a moment. But what led you to switch to writing novels?
The question is actually should be asked in reverse. Ever since I was a little girl, I was going to write novels. I did write novels. I mean, my first novels were written, when I was in elementary school, carefully, printed on lined paper, like they have in elementary school. I started trying to publish when I was, a teenager, like too young to sign a contract. So, what happened was I went to college, and a roommate suggested I go work on the school newspaper, and I did, and I fell in love with journalism, and all of a sudden, all these opportunities, were there for me, and I got hired right out of college in Silicon Valley, actually, the chain of papers in Silicon Valley. And off to the races. And I was, newspapers and magazines and nonfiction books and having a blast until I kind of said, well, but I was going to write novels, a few decades ago. What happened? So it's almost the other way. And I just finally said, I do want to do this. I do want to write novels. And I've had fun writing nonfiction and won some awards and had some fascinating experiences. But let me go back to fiction.
And there may be lawyers or others who enjoy writing, and maybe a lawyer is tired of writing nonfiction and wants to switch to fiction. How can they take the first step and write short stories or author a book or even write a nonfiction book about some aspect of the law? What would you recommend as some first steps?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I think the first step is you have to dedicate some time. You can't just say, I'm going to do it. And I know, listen, it's hard. You lawyers, you're working 12-hour days sometimes. You maybe have kids, but do it. You've got to promise yourself you're going to wake up at 5 a.m. on Saturday and take an hour, whatever it takes, and religiously stick to that and sit down at your laptop and write. And it can be junk and you could delete the whole thing. But it's practice. And maybe you'll save a phrase out of all that. And the other thing I'd say is let your mind wander. Like if you are somebody who likes to take long walks, for exercise or you bike to work or whatever. I mean, still be safe, watch out for traffic. But, start doing what ifs. Look at a person walking by and try to imagine that person's life,
or maybe you can imagine your life in an alternate universe or an alternate career or alternate world.
Or think about what that person might be suing someone else over, right? I have to tell you one quick thing. When we were on vacation, my husband and I, and I just was walking through this cemetery. It was, a historic area. And I looked at the gravestones, and they just told such a story. There was gravestones. There's a woman and a man. Wife of, husband of, and there was like this little boy died at the age of 2 months. This little girl 2 years later died at the age of 2 months. This little kid died at the age of 3. This little kid died the same year at the age of 5. And then one little kid outlived her parents. and you looked at that and you said, oh my God, here's this mom, this family. And I started imagining their life. My point is, anyway, you just let your mind go. You're never going to write it down. Maybe it may never become a book. It's exercising your mind. That's, of course, fiction. If it's nonfiction, of course, some of the same ideas apply. Whether it's a memoir or a research book, you have to set aside. You have to absolutely keep to that, even if it's only 1 hour a week, because otherwise it'll never happen.
And Fran, we just have to take a little break, and maybe you can tell us the value of lawyers or others trying to put pen to paper or their fingers on those keys and to write something, fiction or nonfiction or something else. But I don't want to remind the listeners, we're talking to Fran Hawthorne. She's a journalist and a prize-winning nonfiction author and also a novelist, and she's the author of the new book, I Meant to Tell You. We've talked about a little earlier today, and we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. And if you missed any portion of this program or you want to tell someone else about it, you can go to nccradio.org, and you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, celebrating our 50th anniversary as the radio station of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. So, Fran, any other tips on how lawyers or others can get started on could be a fiction or nonfiction book, something they have a passion, something they want to communicate, and to take those first steps?
Well, first, I want to congratulate the radio station you just mentioned, 50th anniversary, and that's pretty amazing. What is it? Diamond Jubilee? Anyway, and golden. Anyway, that's terrific. And you raised an interesting point that I don't want to drop, and that is what value lawyers can add to nonfiction or fiction books. I think that, of course, many careers give the people who work in those careers a really fascinating, insight into a world that the rest of us who are not in that career don't know. Some, I think, are more interesting than others. I don't mean to sound, elitist or something. I think lawyers, you are so lucky because in your career, you're first of all dealing with people. That's already fascinating, all the different characters. And you're dealing, depending on your specialty, of course, but it can be a range of issues. And each legal case is a novel. Each legal case is a short story, potentially, right?
Or a long story, yes.
Or a long story, yeah. It's got a plot. I mean, it depends on, again, your legal specialty. This might be more true, for example, in criminal law, which is why so many books about the law are, thrillers. But it's also landlord-tenant, right? Employer negotiations, family court. Oh my God, family law, divorce law.
And some of it works out in fiction as well. And we see stories about divorce and about crime and about being a defendant or a commercial, titan, on TV and in the movies all the time.
So in my book, for example, think of all the aspects of legal issues. There's first of all divorce law, because this is all set off when Roni, this character, and her husband are involved in a very bitter, nasty divorce. So you've got divorce law. Then you've got her taking her child to visit her parents in Israel, which brings up international kidnapping and then violations of custody. So now we've got kidnapping, Hague Convention, international law. Then you've got, as I said, the two main protagonists, Miranda and Russ. And Russ is an assistant U.S. attorney. He's got his security clearance. He's got the risk of losing his job because of lying on his security questions. You've got his own work. He investigates all kinds of business fraud. That's another aspect of law. And then there's more than that, because when we go back through the characters' family histories, it turns out that the other main protagonist, Miranda, her parents were anti-war activists in the 1960s, anti-Vietnam War activists. Her father got arrested 3 times, for all kinds of protests. That's another kind of law. So here we have a book that is not a courtroom thriller, and look how many different ways the law is important in plots,
And we just have a little time left in this program, but you don't have to be a lawyer to enjoy this book.
Oh, no. Thank you. I hope not. Indeed, non-lawyer. Well, I shouldn't tell the audience. Non-lawyers will, I hope, enjoy it for learning about things they didn't know, and lawyers, I hope, will enjoy it whether it's areas they know or not.
And tell us I know you have some thoughts, just very briefly, on lawyers who want to switch to a career, or others who want to switch to a career as a writer. Do you just very briefly have any other thoughts for them?
I'm just saying, if you want to, just try writing. It doesn't matter if you throw it out. Try it. If you pull together a short story, there are tons of small literary magazines you can try sending it out to.
Where can our listeners find out more about this book and your other books?
Thanks for asking. You could go to my website, which is Hawthorne Writer. So it's HAWTHORNEWRITER.com. So it's my last name, Hawthorne, and then the word writer.com. Of course, you can find the book on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes & Noble, online, bn.com, all the places you might look for a book. And I'm at Twitter and Instagram at Hawthorne Writer, that same combination. So sure, thank you for asking.
And of course, this book is a great gift for a lawyer or a law student or a non-lawyer as well.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It's been great talking with you.
And just give us your contact information one more time, Fran, for information about the book.
Yeah. So my website is hawthornewriter.com. HAWTHORNEWRITER. My last name, Hawthorne, plus the word writer. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Hawthorne Writer. And you can find the book on, Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, Books A Million, kind of all the usual places.
And I would like to thank our favorite author, Fran Hawthorne, who just wrote this new book, I Meant to Tell You, about a lawyer and his adventures or misadventures, for being our guest on Law You Should Know and telling us about her latest work of interest to both lawyers and non-lawyers and students and anyone looking for a good, interesting novel where they will learn something about these various areas of the law. If you missed any portion of this program, please feel free to go to the podcast or tell someone else about it at nccradio.org. And please join us next week at this same time for another program of Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, celebrating our 50th anniversary in Garden City, Long Island, New York.